the Jewish people started increasing, it says in Pasuk Vav, Vayamas Yosef v'chol Echov v'chol Hadorahu. Yosef and all of his brothers and the entire generation pass on. And then it says, Uvnei Yisrael paru vayishritzu vayirbu vayatzbu b'mod ma'od. The Jewish people increased, vatimole ha'aretz osam. The land became filled with them. And it is this pasuk, you've probably heard the Medrash yet, at one point the Jewish women were giving birth to 6 at a time. 6 at a time. It's based on the fact that there are 6 words in this pasuk. Paru, vayishritzu, vayirbu, vayatzmu, b'ma'od ma'od. Very much. The Jewish people started giving birth to 6 at a time. Now, they have made calculations. There have been figures. They came to Mitzrayim with 70 people. They left with 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, which, based on that, if you take into consideration women, older, younger, so the estimation is that they left with about 2.5 million people. The demographic experts say that you can't go from 70 to 2 million, 2.5 million in 210 years is growth beyond natural law. It doesn't, for some reason, take into consideration how many people would have had to die and live and born and that sort of thing. So the Medrash says says openly they came down with 70 people, and they left with 2.5 million. So there's some sort of miraculous demographic growth for the Jewish population. Now,
when they left Egypt, they also left with non-Jews as well.
Right, but the Jews are said to be 600,000 men between the ages of 20. You're right. There are certain non-Jews who were wannabes, but the Jewish men are counted as 600,000 shishim ribo, and that's only between the ages of 20 and 60, and that's the males. So that means that they're counterpart females. And by the way, there are always more women in the world than men. There are always more women in the world than men. Why that is, we don't know. Women actually outlive men. Do you know that? Statistically, women, I think nowadays the life expectancy for a man is 73. And for a woman is about 76 or 77. Why that is, we also don't know. And whether or not it's a good thing, we don't know. But it's just a fact. They've also done studies that indicate that married men live longer than single men, but that married men are more willing to die. So now why that is, and if that is a good thing, or else we don't know. The Jewish people, and that's just a parallel amount of women. Then you got to take men under the age of 20, men over the age of 60. Same thing parallel for women. That's the estimation they make. Again, I don't know if it's 2 million, 3 million, whatever it is. Apparently, the growth does not work mathematically if you make generational calculations. However they do that, there's some sort of miracle. Because it's interesting, the Medrash says they were giving birth to 6 at a time. So you can have a small Jewish family of 18, and then you have the Goldsteins down the block who have 60. And so this tells you something about Jewish numbers. In any event, Yosef dies and everybody else dies. And then it says, Vatimole ha'aretz osam. The land becomes filled with them. And this, according to the commentaries, is the springboard for where the Egyptian policy of killing Jews and oppressing them, first oppressing them, then killing them, where it begins. The Medrash says that the Egyptians saw the Jews the land was filled with them. The Jews originally were in Goshen. Goshen apparently is one region in Egypt. That's where Yosef had situated his father and the brothers. And that's where the Jewish stronghold was. But then they spilled out, Vatim Molei ha'aretz, the entire land of Egypt became filled with Jews. And like anybody else, when you're I think that Europe is experiencing this to a certain extent with Muslims. Hey, democracy says we're all the same, right? Democracy says we don't look at Muslim, Frenchman, German, American. We don't look at that. We only look at citizen. Right? That's what democracy says. But everybody knows deep down inside that the Frenchman says, hey, democracy today, democracy tomorrow. Bottom line is, there's supposed to be democracy here, but why are the Muslims overrunning the country? This is France, right? Yeah, democracy says we look at the majority. That's just too bad. You created the rules. Now you're going to have to play the game the way the game is played. In Israel, when the election in Israel was set up, it's a democracy. And all of a sudden, there's religious representation because the religious numbers, demographics, the religious are growing, the seculars are decreasing. And even in the Sephardi community, where the Ashkenazi elite were the ones who set up the country, and when Menachem Begin was voted into becoming by largely the Sephardi contingent and what they call the lower class of Israel, the upper class Ashkenazi were up in arms. Oh, 1 second, fellas. You said democracy. And they voted for him. And they said, yeah, we meant democracy, but not this kind of democracy. That was one of the comments that they made. We didn't mean this. Yeah, well, sorry, those are the rules of democracy. Now, the Egyptians are feeling the same thing. The Egyptians say, hey, what the heck? Everywhere we go, there are Jews. And then the Medrash says, remarkably, the Jews, they saw them in the tiatraos v'kirkasos, in the theaters and circuses. Now, I felt that when I saw that Medrash, I got the goosebumps because that is so accurate for what happened in America. Theaters doesn't just mean they bought tickets and watched a performance. Who took over? Who created Hollywood? Who set up the theaters in America? You know, Metro Goldwyn Mayer. You know, those are not Italian names. What do you call it? 20th Century Fox, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, I forgot the other, Paramount. These are all Jews. These are all Jewish productions. The Jews were in Hollywood. They were running Hollywood. So what's happened is, and this also goes back to sports, by the way. Alex, I get to you 1 second. What happens in the sports is somebody once pointed out that what happened throughout history when the Gentiles / anti-Semites, not all Gentiles are anti-Semites, but there were certainly a lot of them. And on a day when they had a day off and they were drinking, what activity often followed after that?
Watching sports, I'd imagine.
Well, not in the 1600s, and not in the 1700s. I'm talking about back in after drinking.
Eating, circus, and plays.
Circus and plays, and if that didn't work, because you didn't go to circus and plays, so what did you do? You went around hunting down Jews. Jews were always fair game. So somebody once pointed out, you have in the United States now, on any given Sunday, you may have 80 million men who are preoccupied with something, and goodness knows what else they'd be doing if they weren't involved in a stadium and they weren't watching sports. So that has turned into a blessing for the Jewish people. So what did the Jews do? The Jews go and get involved with it. The Jews become the owners, the Jews become the agents. Stay away from there, leave them, you finally have some freedom to do it. No, the Jews gotta be there, they gotta be prominent, and you're all over the place. Every owner, you know how many the head of the NBA is a Jew. David Stern is a Jew. The owner of the White Sox is a Jew. The owner of the Cubs is the same of the what do you call it? Of the Bulls is the same Jew as Jerry Reinsdorf. Commissioners, agents, and the Jews are all over the place. The only thing the Jews don't do is play. Jews don't play. They're the agents, they're the lawyers, they're the guys suing the players, representing the players, everything but play. Once in a while you get the Jew, and he becomes the big Jewish hero. They're usually not very good. So here the Egyptians suffered the same thing. Hey, the Jews are taking over the country. That always brings a backlash. Alex, what were you going to say?
Oh, this is from just
go ahead.
A little while ago. When we left Egypt, I thought a lot of people stayed behind in Egypt.
Well, there is a medrash that says they didn't stay behind, they died. The medrash says that, because then the demographics become even more astonishing. Right. The medrash says 4/5 of the Jewish people died during the plague of darkness. The ones who resisted, did not want to go out. There's a medrash that says 4/5 died out. It's based on the pasuk. Later on it says, Vachamushim. The Jewish people left Egypt armed. But the word chamushim also is rooted from the Hebrew word chamesh. And the Medrash says they left 1/5 of them left the country. 4/5 died in plague. We did make a calculation, then that means there were 10 million Jews. Right? So the numbers are only bigger, not smaller. So what happens is the Egyptians, there's a backlash because the Jewish people are filling land instead of maintaining a low profile and staying in your ghetto. So the Jews are always damned if they do and damned if they don't, right? If you stay by yourself, they say, well, the Jews are always sticking together. And if you integrate into the society and you assimilate into the societies, then you get Germany in the 40s. Right? Well, the Jews are the lawyers, and the Jews are the doctors, and the Jews are the engineers, and the Jews are taking over the country. So now we're going to have to pass laws, and that was always the way it was. Jews are limited to certain professions. All through the Middle Ages, there was one profession that the Jews are allowed, which is to be money lenders. And then when they were money lenders, then the Jews are charging us. I said, well, you put us in this position to be money. What else could we do? We got to make a parnasa. So the Jews were always, no matter what you do, but through history we have found, we're still better off in the ghetto than we are assimilating. Because when there's assimilation, there's always a violent backlash. Because people feel threatened. You're taking over our jobs, you're taking over our country, you're taking over our finances. And therefore, the Egyptians are feeling the crunch. Now, look at Pasuk Ches. Vayakam melech chodash al Mitzrayim, asher lo yada es Yosef. A new king arises who did not know Yosef. That's a very difficult thing to believe. They didn't know Yosef. Consider Yosef was a viceroy for 80 years. 80 years. Yosef died at 110. He started when he was 30. 80 years. He was never deposed. A king did not know Yosef. So there are two opinions in the Gemara. There's one opinion that it was literally a new king. It was literally a new king who ignored Yosef. The other opinion is not a new. It's the same Paro, but he pretended he did not know Yosef. Okay? Now, according to the opinion that it's a new king, let's go with the opinion because that's what the words say at literal level. A new king arises. When you become a new public official, what is your first concern? What's the first concern of any public official? Establishing yourself in a solid position. Now, there's one policy that has always worked through history. You want to become popular? There's one thing that's never failed, which is blame the Jews.
Well,
Blame the Jews. That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, if you want to become, you're right. Pick on someone, and through history, the people who have been picked on is the Jews. The Gemara says, Kol hametzer li Yisrael na'aseh rosh. Anybody who picks on the Jewish people vocally, publicly, will rise to prominence, which is true. You may not remain prominent, and you may have a downfall. You will be heard from. There's a guy, what's his name? Louis Farrakhan? Louis Farrakhan. You know, Nation of Islam, David Duke. These are people who are really insignificant. They haven't achieved very much in life. They only have one thing going for them, which is that they have a big mouth. And when when David Duke, I was in the States when David Duke ran for the Senate, I think, Senate or Congress? Senate. He didn't make it. But I remember seeing the news, and they were showing David Duke, who's a Ku Klux Klan.
at one point, he was the Grand Wizard of the KKK.
Was he? He was the, what's that? That's the leader.
Right.
Okay. So David Duke, here he is, a Klan guy, and he's running for that. And how many votes is he going to get? And then they showed on the news, they have a map of the United States. And where was he from? Tennessee, Alabama, one of those places. One of those places down, in the South. And they show a map of the United States. And then they have red dots on the map showing where there were pockets of support for David Duke. And all over the United States, Oregon, and California, Montana, pockets, and they showed concentrations. So he didn't make it, but they showed that there's far more support for him than anybody anticipated. Because what the Gemara says is the anti-Semitism is always lying dormant under the surface. It requires somebody to fan the flame, and when one big mouth gets up, and fans the flame, then you're going to see the pockets come out. The people who, I don't feel like being the leader, but I'll certainly jump on the bandwagon. And that's always been a no-fail policy. So what does the king do? He says to his people, the Jewish people are far more than us. Are more numerous and stronger than we. Now that's not true. They weren't more numerous, and they certainly weren't stronger. The Egyptians still had the weapons. However, Hava nischak malo, let's outsmart them. How does the outsmart translate? Let's outsmart them. I don't like the word outsmarted. That's a literal translation. Let's make a strategy to counter them. Why? Pen yirbe, because they might increase. V'haya kisikrena milchama, and if we end up going to war, v'nosaf gam hu also neinu, they'll join our enemies. V'nilcham bano, they'll fight us. V'olam minartz, and they're going to leave the land. Right? Okay. If I was the Egyptian king, I would call a meeting, and I would say, listen, guys, we got a problem with the Jews. What's the real threat here? The real threat of the Jews is, you know what? They might join our enemies. Let's get to the point. It's not the order Paro says it in. He says, listen, the Jewish people are rab ve'otzu mimenu. There are a lot of them. And if we happen to go to war with our enemies, they'll join. He's got a hole, fetching him at the thumb. And therefore, we have to do something about it. So the commentaries say, what's really bothering Paro here? What was really bothering you? You're really worried about the Jewish threat. The Jews are going to join you. Why should they join your enemies any more than you? If they're living well in the country, why should they be disloyal to you if they're living well in the country? So they'll join you against the enemies. Why should they join the enemies who are attacking you? Does that make any sense? Jews have always fought. The Jews in America fought for the United States in World War II. The Jews in Germany fought for the Germans in World War I. The Jews in France fought for France. Why should they become disloyal? So the commentators say, well, what's really bothering Paro? What's really bothering Paro is the first thing he said. The Jewish people are rav ve'otzum mimenu. Rav ve'otzum at one level means they're more numerous. At another level means they're more high caliber than us. They're outstanding. They're very, very talented people. It's really bothered by it. They're jealous of the Jewish people, which is one of the causes of anti-Semitism. Once you're jealous, you can't just say, let's kill them because they're great. Then you got to find an excuse. Then you got to find a justification. What's the justification? The justification, well, maybe they'll join our enemies, or, we better do something to oppress the Jewish people. What's really bothering you over here? What's really bothering you over here is, number one, I want to solidify my position. And number two, we're all jealous of them. We don't like the fact that the Jews are the guys who own the businesses. Well, go to college and you'll own a business. And people always say, why do I got to work for the Jew? Well, the Jew went to medical school. You didn't go to medical school. You could have gone. You could have, instead of drinking beer, you would have ended up drinking beer, driving a truck if you would have applied yourself. The Jews applied themselves. What do you want from us? It's our fault we became doctors? It's our fault we became the engineers? Yeah, but that bothers us in the kishkis. And that's the real cause of the anti-Semitism. Again, the Torah is just telling you what we're going to see repeating throughout history, the same thing over and over and over and over again. It's going to be the same story over and over. Yeah, looks good.
It says a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. How did he not know Joseph?
So again, according to the commentaries, he pretended he did not know Joseph. He pretended he did not know Joseph. That's what Rashi brings out from the Medrash. He pretended not to know Joseph because everybody knew Joseph. Everybody knew Joseph. Yeah, he couldn't be 80 years. He was the vice for everybody knew him. So it can't be that he didn't know him. So Paro says, okay, we have to start a form of oppression.
The very last thing that Parshat says is that they'll go up in the land. You might be worried that if the Jews are so good, they might get up and leave. It's
well, we don't want them to leave. And then Rashi brings on a second opinion that the Olaminar is just a euphemism. I mean, they'll throw us out of the land. Something when you find this often in the Gemara, when somebody wants to curse somebody, they say it in the third person. When he's talking about somebody's worried something bad's going to happen to himself. I'm worried that he's going to die, meaning himself. He doesn't want to say the words. He doesn't want to say those words about himself. So you say it in third person, but what you really mean it is first person. So Paro is saying, and then they'll leave the land, meaning they'll force us to leave the land. That's what Rashi brings down. And you find that euphemism in the Gemara all the time. The Gemara talks about calamities befalling the Jewish people. That if the Jewish people sin and they do this, then that brings calamities on Soneim Shel Yisrael, on the enemies of the Jewish people. It's just a euphemism the Gemara is using, meaning on the Jewish people themselves. But we don't want to say on the Jewish people, we don't say anything negative, so we say use a euphemism. But that's what Paro is using, this euphemism as a reference to, hey, they'll toss us out of our land. Listen, again, I think that what's going on in Europe is so educational. If nothing else, it's just so educational because you see the problems that they have and the self-contradictions that they have, and how are we going to make all of this fit in with democracy? And they're really in a catch-22 over here. And the answer is obviously, well, you started out with a given, and perhaps your given is not accurate. You started out with a given. Your given is that democracy is the ultimate value. Now, democracy may be a very good thing, but who told you democracy has to let you get to a point where you justify a same-gender marriage, all in the name of democracy, where everybody in the world knows that it's indecent? So how could you come along and, in the name of democracy, Walt Disney's putting out a film next year called Princes. You know about that? There's a friend where the two princes live happily ever after. A Walt Disney film for kids. A Walt Disney film for children. Princes. That's what the guys told me. That's the name of the film. It's about princes, and they're going to live happily ever after. That's how the film. Now, in the name of democracy, it's all in the name of democracy. Listen, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of this, freedom of that. So what happens in the name of democracy is anybody who's decent is on the defensive. You're phobic about this, and phobic about that, and phobic about the other. Why? I can't be decent. I can't be all in it. So you have your country is being taken over. Well, who told you democracy is the ultimate value? Maybe you should use certain democratic principles. The same way that freedom of speech is a principle, but they already lost, right? Then they defeated in court. You are not allowed to yell fire in a movie theater, even though it's freedom of speech. Because common sense tells you that we're going to have to limit it at some level. You're not allowed to use your speech in order to spread rumors about somebody which could actually harm them. There's a limit on freedom of speech. Well, there's got to be a limit on democracy as well. Now, where that limit is, okay, they got a problem. You got a problem. Torah is not a democracy. Torah does not begin with a Bill of Rights, gentlemen. No Bill of Rights in Torah. Torah is a Bill of Obligations. Torah tells you first what you have to do. It doesn't say, okay, these are your rights. Right? Torah doesn't start like that. Torah says, this is what you have to do. You got 613 obligations. We'll talk about your rights. First finish the obligations, then we'll talk about your rights. It's like the parents at home, First do it, kid. Then we'll talk about going out tomorrow night. First do what I tell you to do. We got a whole list of things. Then we'll talk about what your rights are in the home. Torah's a monarchy. Torah's meant to have a king. The Jewish people are meant to have a king. Torah's not a democracy by any stretch of the imagination. Can monarchy be abused? Of course. So can democracy, as it is. I think the Chinese, if I'm not mistaken, used to argue with the Americans when the Americans in the 70s and 80s would meet with the Chinese and talk about their violation of people's rights, of human rights, human right violations. The counter argument was for the Chinese was, don't talk to us about human right violations. You haven't got a city in the United States where anybody could walk around in the city freely without being worried of getting shot. So don't talk to us about human rights. You're violating human rights. Right, based on your democracy, so everybody in America has 300 million handguns in America. There are no handguns in England. Right? Police, even the police don't all have guns in England. You know that? Even the police don't have. You know where you see guns in England by the police? When you go to the El Al counter in the airport. When you go to the El Al counter in England, when you go to the El Al counter in England, then you see a couple of English police with submachine guns and their finger on the trigger. Watch it. I see them all the time. They always got because there are certain there rules, and certain rules are made to be broken, right? And certain rules they're going to be exceptions to the rule. Okay. Now look what Paro does. So Paro goes in Pasuk 2 on page 294. Vayasimu olav sarei misim. Now this word sarei misim we'll see has got many different interpretations. They appointed taskmasters, leman anoso besivlosam, in order to torment the Jewish people through their suffering. Vayiven ore miskinos leparo. They built the cities. How does he translate ore miskinos? Storage cities for Paro. Es Pisom ve'es Ramses. They built these cities called Pisom and Ramses. Now, these Sarei Misim, which are taskmasters on the plain level, means, they're whipping them, as they said. They start getting the Jewish people to do hard labor. The Medrash says that they drew them in. We eat moror. We eat moror on Pesach. Which is the ideal food for moror? Anybody know?
The bitter.
The bitter. What do we eat for the bitter? What's the ideal? The first choice, number one choice for moror? Romaine lettuce. Yeah. Some people eat horseradish, but first of all, horseradish is not bitter. Horseradish is hot. And hot and bitter are two different tastes. And the reason that horseradish is used is because the romaine lettuce often has an infestation of bugs. It's very difficult to check them for bugs. So they now have the romaine lettuce, which is grown in grown in sand. What's it called? The hydroponic. Yeah, thanks. The hydroponically grown. So then you just have to wash it off. That's what we use. We used to use romaine lettuce in the early days. We used romaine lettuce, and you had to check it. They even had certain lights. They had like a background light. You put the leaf on to see the bugs. The bugs are little green bugs. It's very difficult to find them. And it's not where the romaine lettuce, as important as to eat more, it's more important to not eat bugs, which are severe transgressions. So eventually what we did is we started to cut away the leaf part, just ate the stalk, which is easier to check, less of an infestation. Even the stalk, we had to cut it open because the stalk is hollow. And you'd see sometimes bugs inside the stalk, in the area where the bugs would grow, so we cut it open. It was a very, very time-consuming job. So there are a lot of people who wouldn't even mess with it. They would just take the horseradish, which is certainly harder to eat because it's much harder. The romaine lettuce, eat romaine lettuce during the regular week. So what the commentator, the romaine lettuce has a slightly bitter aftertaste, very slightly bitter aftertaste. And the idea is that the way the oppression began in Egypt, they sweet-talked them, and then it turned bitter. It was very subtle. And one of the Midrashim says what they did was they called all the Jewish men, and they said, okay, everybody, in a very, very sweet way, they called everybody out to go make bricks. And not only the Jewish men were making bricks, they put a brick around Paro's neck. And Paro came out there showing that he's also, it's like wearing the uniform. He's wearing the hard hat. And everybody sees Paro is making bricks, so everybody eagerly made bricks. And then what they did was say, okay, count the bricks now. And they counted the bricks, which they made during maximum production time. They said, okay, that's what you're going to have to come up with every day. And then with lack of food and working hard hours, you still have to come up with that amount of bricks. That was what the hard labor was. So they oppressed the Jewish people, and they put them the hard way, building these cities called Pisom and Ramses. We're going to come back to this in a second. I just want to read two more psukim. V'kasher ya'anu oso, and even as they tormented the Jewish people, Kain yirbit v'kain yifrotz. They continued to increase. Vayakutsu mipnei bnei Israel. They felt like thorns in their eyes from the Jewish people. They were just frustrated that here they were pressing them, and the Jewish people keep multiplying. One more pasuk. Vayavidu Mitzrayim es bnei Yisrael b'farach. They put them to work. How did the article go? With crushing harshness. Now I'll tell you why the article translates it that way. Parach we call avodas perach. Avodas perach is backbreaking labor. And the article inserts the word crushing harshness, because the word, when you want to crumble something, something crumbly in Hebrew is called parich. So what they were doing is they put them to they're crushing them. Okay, now, a very interesting insight over here also into what they were doing in human nature. Pisam and Ramses are these cities of storage. They're building up storage cities. So according to the Medrash, as they built whatever they were building, it was on swampy land. Whatever they built started sinking into the earth. What does that tell you?
You're just building for the sake of building.
You're building for the sake of building. Probably one of the most frustrating life. If I would pay you, I'll pay you $100 an hour. I want you to build. I'll give you bricks and mortar. And I want you to build a wall in this room. And at the end of the day, I pay you. You work 8 hours. I pay you $800. Then I take and I knock the wall down. And the next day I say, here, $100 an hour, build the wall. And at the end of the day, I knock the wall down. How long do you think you could do a job like that for? You know, you make a few bucks, but eventually you're going to quit. Eventually you're going to, because human nature is we need to see production. People who work on construction sites, at the end of the day, they like to see that I built the Empire State Building. No, you didn't. You put in a few bricks. Yeah, but I was involved in that project. I was involved in that road, and I was involved in that railroad and that stadium. I was involved in that project. I like to see something came out of it. It's human nature to see there has to be production. So one of the ideas here is to keep them occupied and to break their spirit. How do you break their spirit? You start building cities that are sinking into the ground. That's frustrating. That's going to break the spirit of the Jewish people, number one. Number two, avodas perach means that whenever something is, and you don't know when it's going to end. You don't know when it's going to end. That's called avodas perach. If I would tell you, I say, okay, start digging a ditch over here. Till what time? You just dig. I'll let you know. That's why when you take a Hebrew slave, you're not allowed to make him do endless work. You have to tell him what time it's going to end. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir Yeshiva, one of the leaders of the generation. Whenever he would give a shiur, he said that he would end the shiur on a dime. He never went a minute over the time. Because even for a student in a Torah shiur, the most fascinating thing in the world, it's avodah. I got to know when it's ending. And when you have a family, you want to study Torah with your children, always tell them when it's going to stop. Don't say, hey, let's learn for a little while. Kid won't hear a word you're saying. Because all the kid is thinking is, when is the torture over? Always tell the kid, okay, we're going to learn. And by the way, you don't have to learn for an hour. 20 minutes is good for a kid, and then end early. Tell the kid after 18 minutes, hey, you learned so well, you know what, we're going to stop early today. Most of the time, kids say, no, Daddy, let's continue learning. And if you keep the kid later, a minute later, then the next time he won't hear a word you're saying. He won't hear a word you're saying. You know why? Because all he's thinking about is when is the torture going to end. That's avodas perach. So one of the things, we'll see next time, but one of the things is the avodas perach. But if I go any later, then it's avodas perach, so we have to stop.